Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Kyle and I make reactions to movies and TV shows. What are you doing? Listen, we've talked about this. You know way too much about this show just to do a simple reaction. Get up. Come on. Hello everyone. Alright, let's get to some Atlantis. Da. The show opens with a conversation between Rodney and Carson. As has been discussed in previous episodes, ancient technology only responds to those with a certain gene.
All I need to know is that will enable me to use ancient technology like Major Shepard, or yourself.
Carson has developed a gene therapy that, when given to Rodney, will give him the ATA.
I am manipulating your DNA.
Here we go. Well, maybe you should tell me more.
Or Ancient Technology Activation Gene. It's in this scene that we get the clearest picture of what the ATA gene actually does throughout the entire series.
Our ancient technology activation is caused by a single gene that's always on, instructing various cells in the body to produce a series of proteins and enzymes.
As I've said in previous episodes, Rodney's character has rarely been seen as sympathetic in the TV show. In many of his interactions with Samantha Carter, he made reference to what he saw as reckless or lack of forethought in her behavior. In his opinion, we all know that Sam is the best.
Actually, the interface she designed is full of flaws.
Now, as I've said in previous episodes, Rodney's character usually comes off as pretty self-serving and very cautious.
You are a certifiable whack job, you know that? And you're no better if you listen to her. Her judgment is being clouded by her personal feelings.
So it's unusual to see him so willing to take an experimental drug therapy, even if it's likely to allow him to use the ancient technology. Wonder if maybe there's a more selfish motive behind it.
Oh, something I found in one of the research labs. Something the ancients were experimenting with.
This episode is actually foreshadowing its entire self with this act, though, and it's such a deviation from Rodney's character that I think it deserves mentioning. And it's not as though they'll forget that the ATA gene was a thing in future episodes, right? In a walkthrough with Dr. Weir and Dr. Grodin, a conversation is being had that is needed for the audience. Grodin explains to Weir that many pieces of ancient technology just don't need the gene, or only need to be activated once.
It seems some ancient technology requires the user to have the gene. Other things merely require initialization.
The writers had to come up with a bit of a workaround here. At this point, it's been clearly established that you need the ATA gene in order to use ancient technology. However, it was also very clearly established in the first episode that not many people have this specific gene.
So some people have the same genes as these ancients.
The specific gene is very rare, but on the whole they look very much like we do.
They kind of retconned things and made it so a lot of the times once something is activated, it just can be used regardless. It doesn't require further activation. Or they decided that many pieces of technology didn't require activation at all. Now after this, we cut to a scene in which Major Shepard is pushing Rodney off a balcony.
Oh my God.
Did you see that?
Yes, what the?
I'm fine.
As Stargate took the writing narrative of a sitcom in many respects, it was common for some episodes to have an A and B plot. Rodney explains that the device has made him invulnerable to any form of physical attack.
I was able to activate this. It's a personal shield, acts like a protective skin, and it must have inertial dampening properties too, because I didn't feel a thing.
A fact which is played for jokes in that before they pushed him off the balcony, Major Shepard calmly explains that he tried to shoot him.
That's not the first thing we tried.
I shot him. In the leg.
Invulnerable.
All right, take it off. Let's go have this meeting.
When trying to take off the shield device, however, Rodney finds that he is unable to get it off with his hands in order to remove it.
Could be a problem. I can't get at it.
An interesting fact presented by the show, as the shield device itself seems to be attached to Rodney's clothes and not his skin. But nonetheless, an interesting thought. Perhaps David Hewlett had somewhere in his contract that said he would not go shirtless in the first season. Not soon after this, we cut to a scene in which Carson is treating another member of the team and, joking around, asks Rodney if he's tried to drink or eat anything while wearing the shield. Rodney, ever presently hungry, tries to take a sip of coffee, and again we're presented with an interesting situation in which he seems to be very much able to touch the coffee cup, but is unable to drink any of the coffee.
Relax, you can live 3 or 4 days without water.
I'm talking about food.
It is clear now, though, that as long as Rodney is wearing the shield, he'll be unable to drink or eat anything.
Well, you found some ancient text with the device. What did it say about taking it off?
Oh yeah, there were some explicit instructions which I chose to completely ignore.
And thus the B-plot of the story has been introduced. A conference is going on between Major Shepard, Dr. Weir, Taylor, and a few other members of the Stargate Atlantis expedition team. In the last episode, the team had begun to explore Atlantis, and we see in this episode that they are beginning to settle in and make Atlantis their own. This sets up an interesting tension between the team from Earth and the Athosians. Now, I have some things to say about this. First of all, I think it's important to make note that there is a large strain of colonialism kind of piercing all of the Stargate universe, and this episode, this show, is no exception.
My people can help.
Thank you, Taylor. For the time being, we'll find other ways that the Athosians can contribute.
You do not trust us?
Team Earth sees the city as a great technological find. We see the Athosians, as well as many other groups in the Pegasus Galaxy, look on the Ancients as not just a technological marvel, but as also culturally significant to their history.
Some believe the ghosts of the ancestors remain.
I don't think that's the case, but still, we're gonna need a bit more time.
I have wrestled with this theme that plays an integral part in the show. Because we are ourselves from Earth, if you're an alien, peace. Because we are ourselves from Earth, and we'd been watching the show up until the point of SG-1 becoming SGA, it was very easy to make the transition to Atlantis is good, it should be ours. There is a question that needs to be asked as to how much right the SGA team truly had to seize the entire city of Atlantis for themselves. I would have loved a conversation to have happened at some point in the show as to how much power sharing the Athosians, other members of the Pegasus Galaxy, and the Atlantis team should have had. Now, I think there is an argument to be made that the Atlantis Ancients did somewhat mean for Atlantis to be Earth's, seeing as how the Stargate in Atlantis is the only Stargate in the Pegasus Galaxy that can dial Earth.
As far as we know, this is the only Stargate in the Pegasus Galaxy which is capable of dialing Earth, which would make it the last line of defense against the Wraith.
But that still doesn't negate the fact that the SGA team essentially came into Atlantis, claimed it for themselves, and then didn't really want to share it with any of the locals without their permission. I think history has a similar story. Next is a scene between Carson and Dr. Weir, in which we see Tori Higginson's acting chops at play. They're discussing whether or not Rodney is facing any imminent danger from the shield device, not allowing him to drink or eat water. Dr. Weir suggests that due to the mental component of ancient technology, Rodney may unconsciously not want to remove the device for fear of what the new city holds. And can you blame him?
The Ancients were smart enough to build failsafes into their other technology. Why would they design a personal shield that could kill you?
Taylor and Major Shepard, along with a few other Athosians, are having some fun telling stories and telling her meaningless jokes from Earth, while we are once again introduced to the idea that the city has become much more intimidating as night falls.
Thank you, Major. I hope I didn't scare him too much. I don't think so.
One of the Athosian children wanders off with another child, playing a game that we were introduced to in the previous episode, in which they reenact a fight scene between the humans and the Wraith. The Athosian child, named Jinto, stumbles upon a door in which, upon entering, he seemingly disappears. Soon, a mass search breaks out throughout the city, in which everyone is now looking for Jinto, reasonably. However, as the search gets underway, strange events begin to occur, such as the shield malfunctioning, the gate beginning to auto-dial, and the power throughout the city going out. It's at this point, more haunting elements of the story begin to take over. As in contrast to the B-plot, the episode begins to take a darker turn.
Don't know why that happened.
What the hell is going on?
I don't know.
Nothing like this has happened before.
We've only been here for a couple of days. This stuff is pretty old. Look, it's that or there really are ghosts.
It's at this point that we realize that Jinto may actually suffer some real danger here. He's not a member of the actual cast, and he hasn't been really shown to have an emotional connection to anyone either besides Halling, which is a secondary member in and of himself. So I was worried. Were you worried? As Stargate has illustrated in the past with Cassandra, they're not fond of killing children, but they will do it off screen. And it becomes clear to the audience that whatever is now threatening the city is not merely superstition or nerves. Major Shepard and Jinto's dad Halling are talking, and we see the perspective of some ominous force looking at them. Rodney explains away the technical malfunctions that they're seeing as mere malfunctions between their power source and the ancient city.
It could have something to do with the interfaces between our Naquita generators and the city. Well, that or the way we isolated certain systems could be causing erroneous operations in the ancient program.
Taylor brings an Athosian woman to speak with Dr. Weir, explaining that she saw a shadow in Atlantis, prompting Major Shepard to withdraw the team looking for Jinto. As we saw in the previous episode, the Wraith are able to project images and are blamed for the possible sighting of shadows.
A shadow. The Wraith project them, make you see things that aren't there. And yet I sense no Wraith here.
Taylor, have you ever been wrong about that? Taylor says that she senses no Wraith here, but I'm still concerned.
All right, all teams fall back to the gate room and wait for further instructions.
However, Major Shepard points out that if the Wraith were in Atlantis, they would likely make their presence more known.
2 more Athosians reported seeing these shadows.
You know, I don't get that. That means the Wraith would be here. And when they decide to come, they're gonna start blowing the crap out of this place with their ships.
So what, the Athosians are just seeing things?
This is ironic, to say the least, because it is actually the plot point of an entire episode in the future. A Wraith comes to Atlantis and purposely remains undetected for a period of time. So, what do I think was happening? The episode has actually already set it for us. We are just getting settled into Atlantis. Not just the SGA team, not just the Athosians, but we, the audience, as well. And with the odd, occasional interloper, Stargate Command was rarely, if ever, threatened. It was a very safe place. Once you got back through the gate to Earth, you knew that you were pretty much okay. I think that they were trying to emulate this exact same feeling on Atlantis. They didn't want to introduce the idea that the Wraith could possibly show up on Atlantis, unexpected or unannounced, just quite yet. We needed to settle in. Halling, one of the Athosians, makes a plea via the intercom for Jinto to respond, and upon finishing recites a prayer, once again an indication that the Athosians saw the Ancients as much more of a cultural symbol than just a historical reference.
Rightfully inhabited your great city. We humbly apologize. We mean no harm.
Is that Latin?
It's ancient. Fathers of light of the everlasting temple.
It is a prayer to the ancestors.
And in the next moments, the lights in Atlantis go out, and again, using Rodney for more comedic elements, he faints. I remember that as an audience member, I was still certain at this point that this was not the Ancients, but that something else must have been responsible. Shepard, having made sure that McKay is okay.
He fainted.
Well, there's got to be a better word.
Faint is the proper medical term.
I passed out from manly hunger.
Dr. Weir, this is Shepard. McKay's okay. He fainted.
Oh, yeah.
Enters one of the corridors only to see a large, dark mass approaching him. The darkness passes by and Shepard meets up with another team member of SGA to witness as it appears to feed off one of the Naquit generators supporting the city. It becomes evident very quickly that this is dangerous, if it hadn't already, as McKay points out that in lieu of an actual generator, the darkness may choose to feed on the energy of people.
People also give off heat energy. Granted, it's negligible compared to that of a Naquit generator, but you take away this thing's only other obvious source of food, and
You're saying it could come after us?
flying darkness that eats energy can only be very, very bad.
Okay.
In attempting to warn other people on Atlantis, Dr. Weir uses the intercom, which prompts Jinto to respond. After which, we see the team use the transport system in Atlantis for the first time, having mistaken it first for a closet. I have a question for y'all. I've seen in many the Reddit thread as to whether the ancient teleporters in Atlantis are more or less advanced than the rings. What do you think came first? Although they are native to the Milky Way galaxy, the timeline of the ancients would suggest that the rings were built after they came back from Atlantis. So, if that's the case, why do the teleporters in Atlantis seem to be more advanced? The rings can only go in one direction, and the teleporters seem to be able to just go wherever they want. But the one thing I think we can all agree on is that the Asgard beaming technology blows them both out of the water. The entity seems to realize that it's being led in circles, showing a much higher level of intelligence than the team has been willing to grant it just yet, and begins to move in a direction that will bring it in direct contact with Lieutenant Ford and another member of SGA. McKay quickly devises a way for them to escape its path, but Lieutenant Ford, unable to move out of the way for what reason we're not entirely sure, is struck by the darkness, and the audience and the members of SGA hear him scream throughout the intercom. Although Lieutenant Ford is seen to have survived, it's said that it's as though his body was struck by lightning. Meanwhile, McKay has discovered a device that was holding the darkness for containment for quite a while, and that Jinto must have unknowingly released it when he was transported earlier on. The show uses this moment to introduce the idea of Ascension to Atlantis. This notion, as well as a few of the episodes following this, are notions that we, as people who may have already watched SG-1, are very familiar with. So I think it's very clear that the writers are purposely attempting to write something that someone who isn't familiar with SG-1 would be able to digest, or someone who has watched SG-1 but maybe doesn't pay too much attention to Ascension.
Well, at some point during their evolution, the ancients reached an advanced stage of being where they were able to rid themselves of their physical bodies, one in which they live as pure energy. This is the first indication that there may have been evolutionary intervention to get there. What I do know is that the entity is energy. The more it feeds, the bigger it gets. The bigger it gets, the more charged it becomes, and the more deadly it will be.
So this is a habit of science fiction, and it does get under my skin just a little bit. Matter and energy and matter, they exist together. All matter has energy, and you don't really see energy in the absence of matter. So it's very strange that in science fiction, energy is usually presented as this kind of like glowy, orby, aura-ish cloud of something. It's usually like a laser beam or light of some kind that seems to be constrained by a field. Not how energy works. However, I do like the appearance and relationship to energy that we see between this massless blob and what energy actually is, because you could kind of make the assumption that it appears black. It appears like a dark cloud because maybe it's like made of anti-energy, and it's absorbing the energy around it, including light, which is essentially how a black hole works. So it's not necessarily that the blob is actually black, as we will see later on, but more so that we can't see what it is from the outside. The scene that follows is one of the few times I vehemently have disagreed with the narrative an episode tries to develop. Thankfully, the writers, to my knowledge, never lean on this explanation again. Jinto, feeling bad for what has happened to Lieutenant Ford, comes to visit him, and Ford explains to him that he's not mad. Ford uses a play on words, shit happens, and says stuff happens, then going on to explain that the situation is not much different than SGA accidentally causing the Wraith to show up and destroy Jinto's home world. This particular scene plays on some bad strings for me. I think that it's important to realize that when writers are writing these episodes, they are 100% writing dialogue between characters and they are 100% writing story. I think it's also important to realize that sometimes the writers are directly talking to the audience. As I said, when Weir and Rodney were explaining Ascension, there was no real need for that to be included. In the Stargate universe, Ascension is a well-rounded concept at this point. That was the writers talking to the audience. I believe that when the writers wrote this conversation between Ford and Jinto, they were essentially trying to say, yes, SGA screwed up, but it wasn't necessarily their fault. A kid walking into a room and pressing a few buttons that he doesn't know are dangerous is not the same as a military force coming to another galaxy thinking solely of its own benefit and awakening an ancient race which they knew may have existed. Remember, they saw the hologram, and then proceeding to watch that race feed on the entire galaxy while they hide out on a planet. So this is the one time where I think the show would have been better to have not tried to explain something away. Could I be reading way too much into it? Of course, possibly, yes. But that's the point of these reviews and reactions. So if you have a different opinion, let me know. McKay, Weir, and Shepard are gathered in the Ancient Lab around the device that originally released the creature. McKay explains that the device seems to be able to attract the creature and then trap it for study. This highlights how just about every threat over the course of the show will be treated. Winner takes all, only losers leave. Upon trying to trap the creature, though, we get a clear indication of its ability for self-preservation. Turning off all the power of the city and trying to attract the creature to the device it was originally trapped in, the darkness zooms through the hallways. Upon reaching the device, with Major Shepard standing over it, the darkness takes one look and instantly backs out.
Damn thing took one look and went away. It's a lot smarter than we thought.
I think this is the first time that we are introduced, though it's not really discussed, to how ruthless the Ancients may have been. We have seen previous episodes of the show that establish the Ancients are willing to go to some pretty dark measures to attain their goals. However, here we have a creature that appears to be sentient, appears to be intelligent, appears to be self-aware enough that it doesn't want to get trapped in this container again, and yet the Ancients trapped it in there for not only study, but would have had to purposely leave this thing behind when they left Atlantis. They may have left in an evacuation, but they did not leave in such a rush that they couldn't have taken this with them, or better yet, released it back where they found it. I think this really goes to the fact that, as I said in Rising Part 1, the Ancients were probably very antisocial, and I think were much darker than we give them credit for. Especially when you consider that the Ancients themselves came from the Ori, or the race that would become the Ori, and may have had similar attitudes about power and domination, but maybe not about science. We also see that ascended Ancients in the Milky Way galaxy refuse to acknowledge human suffering in the slightest, believing, of course, that this is some kind of higher rule. But there is a question to be asked. Is it really for humanity's own good? Or do the Ancients have a very dark streak in them? Weir and Taylor will go on to become the show's kind of moral center, a role that Daniel Jackson had previously played in Stargate SG-1. So it would be at this point that I would expect Weir to say something along the lines of, have we considered its feelings? But instead she doesn't, and we do get something from Taylor. Following this, we do see Taylor step into the role in which she asks quite simply, what if the darkness does not want to be here? Or, if given the chance, would it return through the gate?
Do you think it wants to be here? It's been trapped here for thousands of years, alone.
It's not alone anymore.
It doesn't think on that level. It thinks about eating, that's it.
Maybe it wants to go.
Dr. Weir may have considered this and decided that it was, at the moment, too risky, considering the gates are some of the most powerful energy conductors the show has ever introduced.
This is a bad idea.
You said that already.
Well, it's worth saying again.
It's coming!
An open Stargate is a huge power source. This thing is smart, and you enough not to get trapped in the ancient containment vessel again.
That was good thinking.
Having fixed a Malp to go through the gate, the darkness is lured to the gate room and surrounds the Malp while the gate is active. As McKay has suggested, this was a bad idea, and the entity seems to hover around the gate rather than going through it.
I can't see if the map got through.
The entity could have drained the battery.
Could be feeding off the generator, off the Stargate. I mean, this is a disaster.
I think there should have even been some question to if the entity would be able to travel through the Stargate at all. The next scene is arguably one of my favorite scenes with McKay, besides maybe his interactions with his sister, in which we see him be very unselfish in un-McKay-ish behavior, although I guess at this point you could say this is McKay's behavior. He puts the personal shield back on and he willingly makes the choice to go down into the cloud where the Malp is and see what is going on. A+ McKay.
It's possible that the entity will still go through the gate once it's depleted the energy in the
Okay?
This is, I think, the moment that if you were on the fence with McKay from SG-1, that you saw him become his own character, you saw that he was not the same person that you had maybe interacted with in the past, and you continue to like him. After entering the dark ocean, we see tiny particles or spheres of what look to be electrical current making up the inside of the darkness. McKay sees that the Malp did in fact not go through the gate and picks up the Naquita generator and throws it through. At many points in this review and in Rising Part 1 and 2, I have said McKay was my favorite character before Weir stepped into that role, and that I couldn't exactly name why. Now I can. It was this scene. The writers were softening him, they were making him human, they were showing that while he can be egomaniacal at some points, he will generally put the lives of his friends above himself, which is like the kind of friend you want to have. The entity follows shortly after, and once evacuating the gate room, we see McKay unconscious and possibly dead on the floor. This moment for me served to crystallize the strength of the McKay character.
What happened?
You did it.
I did?
It was the first of many times that we see how far McKay is willing to go for his friends, and that while he may need a push every now and then, there's a great heart motivating him. I think this describes most people, but I think it especially describes the people that are represented on the SG teams. And with both the A and B plot wrapped up, the episode comes to an end. I think that this, after rewatching it, has to be one of my favorite episodes of Stargate Atlantis. It is an episode that I am very familiar with because if you ever rewatch a TV show, the first couple of episodes are usually the ones you watch, and then maybe like a season or two in, you take a break and think, but then you go back and rewatch the entire thing again, and again, you get exposed to the first couple of episodes. So I have seen Hide and Seek many, many times. I have never looked at it through this light, in the Ascension aspect, in the Ancient's attitude towards humanity, in McKay's development in this episode, in the general way the Atlantis team is treating the Pegasus members. But nonetheless, I think that a lot of these questions are critical, but interesting questions to ask, and I am more than willing to hear anyone else's opinion. I realize that a lot of people love this show. I love this show. Hello, okay? But that doesn't mean that I can't still ask the hard questions. Let me know what you think. Leave a like if you would like to, and the full version, not this version, but the full version of me going over the episode is in the description below, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.